All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to day two's keynote. I couldn't be actually more proud to be here to talk about something that actually hasn't really been talked much about before, which was how something like RxJS came to be. How many people actually know the origins, how old it is, or anything like that? A few people. Okay. Well, this will be kind of a refresher for those who do know it, but we're going to be going back quite a number of years, in fact, probably 14, 15 years, to see where the genesis of RxJS came from. And so just thought I'd start out with a little bit of JavaScript just so that everyone says, hey, what's up? So I am Matt Podwysocki, so if you can actually spell my last name, you can actually follow me on Twitter and on GitHub. And I do occasionally Twitch, do some live streaming on RxJS, IXJS, and as well as some of my other day job related things. So you can find me there on Bluer Than Blue Falcon. So I work for one of these small companies you may have heard of, and in fact that is one of our logos back from 1981, and I really, really wish they had kept it because it is just so awesome, and it would be even more awesome if you just added that to it. Because, you know, with Vikings and Viking metal as a thing, you know, it really, yeah. So I like to think that I try to bring a little bit of metal back to Microsoft. Anyways, I work for a group called Visual Studio App Center. Really doesn't have much to do with Visual Studio at all, in that we allow you to create and deploy applications, whether it's iOS, Android, with Mac, with Windows, any number of apps, and you can do push notifications, which is the part I work on. So if you want to do pushes to Firebase, to Apple, to Windows, etc., well, chances are you're hitting something that I've been working on. But let's take a little bit of a travel back in time to 2005. So in 2005, Web 2.0 was a relatively new thing. This whole Ajax thing was a relative new thing. But then again, so was the cloud. So there was a group inside of Microsoft, especially directed by Ray Ozzie at the time, to say, what can we do about this cloud, and what can we do to make people productive programming for the cloud? And that's a really big blue sky questioning, is just create a group to go and look at these kinds of particular problems. And one of those projects is, you might actually recognize the logo, but not actually the project. So the project was called Microsoft Live Labs Volta. And the idea behind that was that you could write your application in such a way that I could target it to not only to the web, but also to thick clients, and to have parts of your application living on the client and parts of it living on the server. And it was really up to you on how you annotate your application as to which part ran where. So for example, in this particular example, we're creating a div and then creating a button. And that button click, we're all writing in this in C#, and that this get message will then be sent directly to the server via Ajax and serialized directly back down to the client. That's kind of a cool project, but unfortunately, you know, it ran into a bunch of different issues with its scaling, and as well as, you know, politically, it was very difficult at the time because we had a lot of other initiatives going on, such as Silverlight and all of that. Whereas this one was trying to go directly to the web and say, you know, we can treat JavaScript as the assembly language, no matter what language you happen to be writing. We can democratize it in such a way that you can write whatever language you want, and it'll compile down to JavaScript, and you'll be able to write web apps with everyone else. So what happened was we believed at the time that JavaScript really was the assembly language of the web. And this is, and we're talking 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe. Now, no matter what particular .NET language, for example, you're writing, you could write valid JavaScript this way. And so we have a project, it's out there, it's archived. I actually dug up the source off of our, one of our shares somewhere and put it out there for everyone to take a look at, but it's called IAlta.js. And the idea behind that and how it's different from other things at the time. Other things at the time were things like Script Sharp, where it was a dialect of C Sharp, but not quite, and how it would compile down to JavaScript. This takes arbitrary IL and translates it directly into JavaScript. Needless to say, it had a huge runtime because you're trying to take in all of the things that the .NET base class library had and throw it onto the browser. But honestly, it's really not that much different than what WebAssembly is today. Although it's targeting definitely a different language, WebAssembly and so forth. But we truly believed at the time, when we were doing this, that JavaScript and the web were kind of the future in terms of where you want to compile to. In addition, we decided we were going to go a little crazy and create our own JavaScript language. This was around 2009, 2010 timeframe when other projects such as CoffeeScript and things like that were coming out. So we decided to name ours after Douglas Crockford, who was most known for things such as JSON and killing ES4X. So we wanted to kind of give an homage to him. And what we were doing was allowing us to write even things such as link statements, language integrated query statements directly into JavaScript. Now, there were a lot of problems that we had along the way, as you can imagine, because trying to transfer a lot of this knowledge from one piece to the other was really kind of hard. And why was it hard? Is because of that whole click event that we were trying to send from the client to the server. That click thing was just what? Was a handler or something, or was it a little bit more than that? And that's what we tried to solve here. But what we knew all along was that async programming is just terrible. It's just awful. And at the time, we knew for both JavaScript, .NET, and the likes, is that there really weren't any good primitives at the time. Promises A+ was kind of a thing, but not really widely adopted. So what we were trying to do was say, well, could we come up with an idea that could encompass both single value asynchronous behavior as well as multiple? And so to do that, we went back in time. We went back in time again and looked back at 1994 to this Gang of Four books. How many people have actually looked at this book before? Wow, a good majority of the hands. Wow. I didn't realize it was still a thing nowadays. But what we saw were these two individual patterns, the iterator pattern, which was this concrete way of iterating over a collection, and to be able to pull values from it just by calling next or whatever the idiom for your language happens to be. The subject observer, they didn't quite make the connection between the two. But the fact is that the subject observer was largely the same kind of thing, but it was a push-based collection rather than a pull-based collection. So instead of calling next physically, I call something like subscribe, or in this case, notify all observers, and then suddenly everybody gets the data. So that was a real key insight for that. Now, we also looked at something called functional reactive programming, or functional reactive animation. And this gave us two individual ideas. The first is discrete events that happen over time at individual pieces right here. And then you also had this notion of a behavior. So if people who understand RxJS see behavior subject, they kind of know where that idea came from, where it always has a value. But this deals with continuous time and so forth, and we didn't really agree with a lot of the things that were in functional reactive programming, which is why I've always discouraged the use of FRP and functional reactive programming when describing Rx, because it's not quite the same thing, and I'd rather defer to Connell and Paul, the late great Paul Hudak's definition on that. So what we really thought, though, was that your mouse was a database in the way that you could move your mouse and your mouse would give you specific feedback, for example, that you can query just like anything else. Like if you can query an iterable to do map and filter and so forth with an iterable such as an array, why can't you do the same with something like a mouse movements or mouse clicks or anything like that? Why can't we do kind of the same thing? So that's kind of what we were going for when we created RxJS. Is we thought, and eventually after the Volta project folded and as did Live Labs, the Reactive Extensions team became the cloud programmability team in the SQL Server organization, which obviously now made us more think about things like querying and databases and so forth. And yes, there is that dreaded M word. We did mention that a lot in a lot of our early talks. So if you go back to Channel 9 on MSDN, you will find a number of talks that talk about monads directly. I'm not going to sit up here and pretend to be an absolute expert on how to describe them, so I will simply refer to how the late great Joe Armstrong said, which is, the easier. Why can't we do talk about the easier things in computer science? Like, tell me, what is a monad? And what is a monad? Well, it's a thingy. Don't worry about it. It's a word that makes you kind of feel smart if you know what it actually means. But for the most part, when you're creating Rx, you don't really have to know about that word. Even though early on, if you see a lot of our stuff, we had monads, comonads, endofunctors, blah blah blah. All right. So what this all led to was this language agnostic approach to reactive programming. We worked directly with a lot of people, such as Netflix, and they created an RxJava version. I created the JavaScript, Ruby, and started Python or a few of the other languages. But it was really interesting how some of them took off and some of them didn't. But since I was one of the true believers in the open web, I wanted to focus most of my time on the JavaScript community because I thought that ultimately that's where people are going to be working. And obviously, we've got a lot of instances of Rx depending on what language you happen to be writing. So if you like Go, there's RxGo. If you like Python, there's RxPy, RxJava, Rx.NET, RxCPP, RxJS. Pretty much name your platform, and we've pretty much got you covered there. So what's really nice about that is if you learn it once, you kind of know the general idea of knowing it on every platform. And what we tried to do was when we were thinking about this in the synchronous and asynchronous single value and multiple value world, we wanted to give you a kind of a programming language plane so that when you could think about an iterable such as an array, you could do filters and maps the same way that you could do filters and maps on observables. So asynchronous data, once you know kind of the patterns of this of an array, then you pretty much know how to start to think about reactive programming and, more importantly, observables. But I'm not to say that it's easy because really it's kind of not. There is a learning curve. I'll be the first to admit it. There's a learning curve in that hot and cold observables. This kid is learning that he thought it was a cold observable and it is in fact a hot observable. So he's completely missed it. So that and our early documentation did not help either. So it's been a great thing that that the RxJS community has, in fact, stood up and really helped us out in getting a better message out there for everyone. But what was really cool was when we created RxJS, we had no intention of taking over your entire stack, meaning use RxJS and only RxJS. If you used YUI or used jQuery or Dojo or MooTools, chances are we had some bindings there for your libraries that you already used. So if you wanted to extend jQuery with Rx, we had a library for that. And even HTML and the DOM, I was silly enough to have actually written an Ajax stack before, all completely in observables. Why, I don't know. But it's still being used to this day, and in fact, we're still expanding upon that with things like, you know, from events and over the Fetch API, WebSockets, etc. But where it got really, really interesting was that the Angular community really took off with this, especially in the 1.x timeframe. That we started seeing a lot of interesting things coming there from scopes, from watch, and from a number of things. That it really made sense that that Rx would fill a really good spot with Angular, in the fact that not only is it really good with events and with reactive binding and asynchronous binding, but it was also good for things like HTTP, where unlike promises at the time, RxJS has our Ajax stack and other stacks are completely cancelable. So when you're writing something like an auto-suggest, you can actually complete things and cancel them as well. And we did change over time. So, you know, when we had a lot of these things when we first started out, we said, okay, chaining syntax is a thing to do. It's a batteries included, everything you get there, boom, you can just dot off of that. The problem with that, obviously, is that the size of your of the package that you get can be rather large, and tree shaking was rather difficult at the time. So then we started to switch more towards this additive thing where you start off with nothing and then only bring in the pieces that you want and need. And that helped a lot, but still people wanted an even more different approach with pipes, so that we could, for example, just directly pull in the operators that we want directly and then use the pipe syntax to do that. But what was really, really cool was to see some of these patterns starting to emerge where Rx I didn't initially think it was going to be used. For example, as state management. So Redux became almost a de facto thing in the React community, even though it really is just one line ish of RxJS, which is the scan operator, which is basically an incremental reduce. And what's really cool is that we have a lot of those kinds of things now in the Angular community, so that if you want to use a particular state management library, things like Redux Observable, NGRX, NGXS, or Akita, those are all there. And pretty much, you know, looking at my watch, probably another 5 will show up in the next day or so. Now, the thing is, though, is that observable certainly was one thing, but the problem is one thing. And Sander, call subscribe for me.
Subscribe.
Okay.
I think I'm subscribing.
You're still subscribing until you call unsubscribe. I'm gonna. Okay. Oh, by the way, we had some late ones, by the catch. So, now, the problem with that ultimately is that things can overload. And so we have to sometimes think about different ways of approaching this because of the fact that, once again, subscribe. There you go. Okay. Rejected. Okay, so anyways, things can overload. So what do we do about that? Well, there are things such as RxJS, which is another library that's more recent, which allows us to use such things as async generators and async iterables. So it allows us to handle data in such a way that, that we can deal with back pressure. And we also have things like async iterable. So where do we go next? I mean, it's really, really up to you all. Where do we go next? So let's build something amazing together. Thank you.